Hey guys, I'm Michael Cheney. I'm a professor of film and television in the department here at SCAD in Savannah, Georgia. And welcome out to Guest and Gusto. Today we are thrilled to have producer Marian Macgowan with us. We're going to talk about what makes a good TV series. We're going to hear from you guys who are percolating ideas, and we're going to walk through this terrific Q&A about Hulu's new series, The Great. I really hope you guys have had an opportunity to watch it. I was telling Marian earlier, I binged it in about 3 days and inspired some incredibly lucid and interesting COVID dreams. So here we are. Marian, you are the principal of Macgowan Films, and that is an independent Australian production company that develops, finances, and produces feature films, television, documentaries. And you've done some really great stuff. You produced all 10 episodes of the darkly comedic Hulu series, The Great, starring Elle Fanning and Nicholas Hoult. More on them later. You've also produced Lillian's Story with Toni Collette. Let me tell you how much I adore her. Also, Two Hands. You worked with Tony McNamara in The Rage in Placid Lake. You did a film called Sal Solitary. You did documentaries called Boxing for Palm Island and Women He's Undressed. You've been doing some really amazing things. And your most current project is, of course, Hulu's The Great, which is a very historically liberal take on Catherine the Great and her relationship with Peter III, or maybe some Peter II thrown into.
Maybe somebody called Peter.
Yeah, that guy. Congratulations on your Television Critics Association Award nominations.
Thank you.
You got nominated for Outstanding New Program and Individual Achievement in Comedy for Elle Fanning.
Yeah.
Richly deserved. You've been working with Tony McNamara for a while, haven't you?
Yeah, we started working. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, I just want to, for our students who are watching, I just want to remind you, Tony McNamara is a playwright, a filmmaker. He also wrote the screenplay for Yorgos Lanthimos' film, The Favorite, and got an Academy Award nomination for that. And The Great, if I understand, is based on his play that he wrote about Catherine the Great. It is irreverent. It is completely historically inaccurate. No, there's some.
There are some accuracies.
Yeah. There, as you said earlier, thematic accuracies.
Thematic accuracies, yes, exactly.
I've always said, as a Southerner, I've always believed that you can never let the facts get in the way of telling a good story, as long as the essence is there. It is almost a little bit like an alternative timeline, like Inglourious Bastards or something. But anyway.
Yeah, I think I like to think of it as that what we've done is we're interpreting the character and themes of Catherine the Great, and that what we do is we take from reality, or from the truth, or from what we know of history, those elements that help us in telling that story or that interpretation. So I sort of see it like that, rather than, and it's what you've just described as, the never letting facts get in the way is the problem that you come across with every biopic, I think, or every biography. Every time you try and draw from real life, you look at it and you go, well, it's just not falling into a 3-act structure. What are we going to do? So I think you have to make a view about why you're telling the story about that person. What is it about that person's life or character or experience that you're trying to bring to the screen and try to tell them a story? And that, I think, guides you through what elements of the facts of their existence as you know them are you going to use, or what portion of their life are you going to take, is the other way to look at it.
Let me ask you about this. You worked with Tony McNamara in The Rage in Placid Lake. So you have a history together. How did this series happen? How did it percolate? How did it develop? And what was your relationship in that development?
Well, Tony and I started working together when he was still at film school at the Australian Film, Television, Radio School in Sydney, which is our national film school. He was working there, and he and I met at a party, as you do, and we started working together, and that's why we developed Rage in Placid Lake, which was also based on a play, because Tony was primarily a playwright at that point. And so we did that first one, and then we continued to develop another projects. I went to see the premiere of his play, The Great, at the Sydney Theatre Company. It was a commission of the theatre company. That's it's a national, it's a kind of partially supported by the government. So it's like our national theatre in the UK sense. And watching it, I had been looking for a vehicle for an older female actress at the time. And this struck me for two reasons. One, because it was such an interesting story, essentially about a woman who positively affects the world around her. I mean, there are lots of stories in which women support people or do things or are brave or react. You know, it's the Joan of Arc kind of phenomena versus the woman behind the man kind of phenomena. This was a woman who positively affected the world that she was engaged with, which I felt at the time was a story that would strongly appeal to a sort of generation of women coming out of their 20s and 30s at that time. And we were looking for a vehicle for an older actress that we were talking to about doing some work together with a director. And so I optioned it, and Tony and I developed it as a screenplay, originally for a feature film, because that was what the actress was interested in. So originally we wrote it as a film. The problem with it, so to speak, or the structural problem we faced in development was the play was bifurcated. So the first half of the story was what you see in season 1 of the television series, and part 2 of the play. So there was an intermission, and then you would come back, and we were with Catherine 25 years later. So we had a different actress. She had children. She was dealing with the aftermath of the choices that she had made to come to power. So it's in that sense, it was very much about a story about power. Tony written it originally, primarily because he was fascinated by the character of Catherine the Great, and he did do research, not a lot of research, but he did do some research. But also he wrote it in I suppose in a sort of subconscious reaction to George W. Bush. And the sort of power the sort of leader that he was, the sort of power that he exercised, the way he exercised power, what he did with it, what he understood about it. But really, I suppose, in a sense, the kind of leader that he was. So if you look, and the television series continues that theme of power and how in our story, we have a character, Catherine, who believes that she is born to be a great leader and has the wherewithal to be one. And she marries a man who's born to power, but doesn't know what to do with it and doesn't know what it is or how to deal with it. And there are some echoes of that in current political figures in the world today.
So was the play as irreverent and funny as the show is?
There are some scenes that are identical to the play. The opening scene, for instance, with the Angelique and Catherine on the swings is the opening of the play. It's word for word. Oh, and there's a couple of other scenes that are direct transcriptions of the original play.
I might be jumping ahead. I know. Congratulations! I hear that Hulu has announced the second season. Or is it going to? Can you tell us? Is it going to take place 25 years in the future, or will it take place?
No. Developing it as a screenplay, that's where we struggled. We struggled with the third act, trying to first of all, the first part gave us a fantastic midpoint, because here she was, she's, and I hope it's not a spoiler alert, but she makes the decisions that she makes, she kills who she needs to kill, and and then we go forward 25 years, but trying to make the second part of the story as satisfying in one act, we just struggled with. So when we came up with the idea of doing it as television, which was primarily, I think, to do with the way television's moved in the last 10 years, you wouldn't have been able to make this show as television 5 years ago. But the way the streaming services are now, the sort of money that they're prepared to invest, their appetite for the unique and original, all of these things contributed to us being just there at the right time with the right sort of idea.
I got to give a big shout out to Hulu and the risk that they're taking. They're creating some really dynamic and engaging content. One of our own grads, Stephen Pyatt, produced and directed a show on Hulu called The Act. It was just terrific. It was shot here in Savannah, had a terrific SCAD crew, bit of a SCAD cast on it too. It was terrific. Well, you're right. You're not giving anything away. No spoilers here, but Peter's overthrown. Okay.
Yeah, we know that.
It's going to be really interesting to see if Nicholas Hoult comes back in some capacity at all, because Peter didn't last long in history, but it should be really kind of fascinating.
It's cute, but although what we do know from history is that she didn't kill him straight away.
Right. They kind of.
So there was,
and there's lots of rumors about maybe he didn't die at all. So it's all kind of fascinating.
I did get a text from a friend yesterday. They were having a social media banter about whether or not she should have killed this person and whether or not he's dying. And she texted me at 11:30 at night going, "Did he die or not?"
Wait and find out. So when did you come on board with this show? After when you met him at when you knew Peter, you saw the you saw the
play. I optioned the play.
Not Peter.
So it was in a McGowan Films production. We were developing it. I was we developed it. We hired Tony. He wrote it. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. So then we did that for quite a long time. I mean, as you all know, development, it can be a nightmare. And it took us 9 years to get it up. Wow.
That's longer than most of your senior projects.
Correct. But I just always loved this project. And we just kept going. We went through a couple of I nearly got it up twice as a film. We were going to do it as a German-Australian co-production because there are treaties with Europe and we could find Baroque palaces there. And we had we had two sort of cast sort of teams and both of them fantastic. But in the end, it was sort of a tonal issue for distributors. We just couldn't raise quite enough money to make it properly. And so then when we decided that Tony would direct it, because by that point he'd directed 2 features, we thought we'd get it. And then he was working with Yorgos on The Favourite, and he rang me and said, "I found Peter," because he was working in the rehearsal room with Nicholas Hoult, and that was just fantastic because Peter's a very difficult character to cast. Finding someone who can be that much of an asshole but still charming and appealing, and yet all the characteristics that Nicholas has been able to bring to that
nailed it
were quite rare to find. So when we found that, and then between attaching Nicholas and attaching Elle, the idea came up to do it as television. It was just like a lightning bolt because Tony had been working in television quite a lot here. He'd created a show here called Doctor and worked on a couple of other shows that he'd show run. So he was experienced. He'd done a few pilots in the US and in the UK. So he was just at the right point in his career as well. So we wrote a pilot script based on the screenplay, and that's what we pitched. We went to LA and we pitched it to 7 networks.
Wow.
And we got 5 offers. So that shows you the change in approach to this sort of material.
So obviously you went with Hulu. That's the word on the street. And
yes.
so how long did it take to shoot all 10 episodes? I want to kind of, I don't know, 2 parts of this question. One is I'm really curious about the writing process and what that writer's room was like. There's a lot of topical commentary on current issues. I read something, an interview with Tony about the way that they would put facts up on a whiteboard, and so we kind of have to incorporate that stuff. I'm fascinated about how it developed in the writing room and then how that moved into casting and then into the production process.
Okay. Tony wrote the first draft and then he wrote the second draft while we were shooting the pilot. So once we'd finished the pilot, we then waited before Hulu decided to commit to the series because it's a quite expensive show.
Looks it.
For Australian context, it's very expensive. We would never do a show that expensive. So when we went into the writers' room, which we did in Australia, so Tony lives about an hour and a half outside Sydney in the country in a town. So we did it there. We all travelled to this little town called Bowral in the Southern Highlands, and there were 2 writers from the US, 1 writer from the UK, and a couple of writers from Australia. And yes, exactly. There are 3 whiteboards. So what Tony's process, he doesn't like too big a room. And the first week is just talk about the whole season. He's usually worked out and certainly as far as seasons 2 is concerned, he's worked out the broad strokes of where our story goes, what's going to happen in that story, which is, you know, conversations that we have sort of before the room starts. And then, yes, exactly. There's research that everyone has to read. So the research is, as much as anything, about events or the world at the time, or where science was, or where medicine was, or where the church was, or just sort of broad strokes, you know, sort of just a picture of the world, of the culture at the time, as well as, you know, we do know what actually happened in that sense. And and then we sort of put that, certain facts go up on a board, and then they move from there into a kind of episode 1, this will happen, episode 2, and over here will be, these are the themes we want to be sure to hit, to cover in that thing. And then those sort of 3 boards eventually come together into one.
That sounds great. How many writers are working in the room?
In the room, the writer's room, when it's sort of active and in one place, which it was in Barron, which we'll have to do virtually this time, it's about 5.
That sounds,
5 or 6.
Sounds pretty awesome.
They're not all, they don't all write episodes.
Right. But knocking ideas around and organizing themes and so forth, and putting it out there. Yeah.
And what you're doing, the casting of the room is as important as the casting of the show in many ways. What we're looking for is, we want a breadth of gender and diversity, but also of age, and not just of age, but also of kinds of experience, you know. So for want of a better description, a happily married woman, an unhappy single woman, or a, you know, bitter older man, or a, you know, you want those different life experiences, because they all inform the way you see the world, and how that's
well, it certainly reflects in the show. You know, I think that the diversity of voices really comes through in the writing, and also in the casting. I loved the non-traditional casting process. Just fantastic. It almost transports me into another realm. Can we talk a little bit about the casting? And I do want to talk also about Belinda Brahmalo. She plays probably my favorite character in the show, which is Anna Elizabeth. You know, nymphomaniac that trains butterflies. She was also, she's married to Tony, right? And she was also in Dr. in The Rage in Placid Lake.
Tiny role in The Rage. Tiny role. She has one line.
Oh.
I remember that. We had a long time. Yeah, it was yeah.
What was the casting like? We know that how you guys secured Nicholas Hoult. How did you find Elle Fanning? What was it like also with the supporting cast, and talk a little bit about the conscious diversity that you incorporated into that process?
Sort of two things. Elle was sort of, we did spend quite a long time looking for that, for Catherine, because again, you have to find a character who's can relay that innocence, but also that sort of sense of purpose and destiny. And Elle has, I think the thing that's really curious and valuable about both Nicholas and Elle is they're both child actors.
Yeah.
So they've both spent their entire sort of coming of age years on a screen. And that really relays, I think, relays well in depicting these 2 characters, because in a way, that's a little bit like having an aristocratic upbringing. You have a sense of entitlement about your role in your position in life. Not that they're entitled, I don't mean that at all, but I mean that they sort of can occupy that royal space very comfortably. As soon as Elle's name was suggested, we just thought, yeah, she was just fantastic. And this was a role that, you know, she hadn't done this kind of comedy or comedy really prior to this. And it was a great opportunity for her. She sort of plays the straight guy in the story in a way. And she delivers that just beautifully. She's
got a wonderful arc throughout the entire season. I mean, you see it, and you know, with no spoilers here, by the time you get to episode 10, you think, wow, let's look back to that first scene in episode 1 to see, you know, where she's moved through.
So the rest of the casting, those 2 elements, we got commissioned on the base of those 2 characters. So then when we went to make the pilot, we spent a very long time casting. And we're very, you know, obviously very pleased, delighted with where we really benefited. We think the show really benefited from the amount of time that we took. We interviewed a lot of people. We looked at a lot of stuff. We thought about it in lots of different kinds of ways. We considered lots of different people for those roles. I mean, the question of the colorblind casting, we always thought that was because it's an anachronistic show and it's not pretending to be truthful. We felt this was an instant visual way of telling your audience, this is not necessarily the way you think of history. You know, it was a sort of instant sort of visual metaphor for the tone of the show, for the approach of the show, the way the show looked at history, etc. So it was a great joy, because you could suddenly be anywhere you wanted to be. You know, you could be looking at anybody for any particular role. It was a great, and we discovered some wonderful actors. I mean, the actor who plays Rostov, for instance, I just thought was an absolute gem. So there were many other others too. I don't wish to be, you know, play favoritism or anything, but it was a great exercise. But we were encouraged to be colorblind as well by Hulu. So that was and the studio. So that was they were very supportive of that.
That's terrific. It really works tremendously well for the kind of tone of the show. And it's something I know, my wife is a huge fan of the show. We watched it well, she's a little bit of a TV cheater. That's another story. She got a little ahead of me. I got very angry about that. Yes.
Right. There's something in the marriage contract that says you're never allowed to do that. You know that, don't you?
Yeah, well.
Yeah, you need to point that out to her.
Oh, yeah, I have. It didn't go very well. So let's talk a little bit about the production. I mean, these sets are amazing. And in that palace, where did you shoot this? How much of it was shot on location? How much of it was shot in the studio? How much construction did you have to do?
Oh, the pilot was shot on location, and that was shot in 5 stately homes in the United Kingdom. So that was, we split that between various things. When we got commissioned for the balance of the series, we built the palace. So there's a studio in East London called 3 Mills, and we've got 4 or 5 stages there, and we built the entire interior of the palace there. So for the series itself, we did the bulk of our work on the stage, and then we did some exteriors around London, sort of some gardens, some forests, that sort of thing. And then the main palace, the exterior of the palace that you see is outside Naples in southern Italy. So it's a place called Caserta Regia, which is in a little town called Caserta. And the grand stairs, some of those huge stately rooms and the gardens, the fountains and all those things, they're in Caserta. So we did it between those 3 kind of locations. Francesca Di Mortella, who built the sets for us, did an amazing job. They were, I mean, the time frame, the detail, she was extraordinary.
Can we talk a little bit about the collaboration on the show? How you and Tony worked with the DPs and production designers, how you field ideas back and forth between one another?
We had 2 DPs who alternated across the blocks, John Broadley and Maya Zamotsky. And John Broadley's an Australian, so Tony'd worked with him before. So there was a working relationship there. I hadn't, but I knew him. And I think it's that, you know, Australia's not a very big country, and we don't all know each other, but it's, there's a certain ease, you know, when you're working with another Australian. So we had a couple of Australians on our crew. But John, so we were quite clear about how we wanted the cinematography to be affected, in as much as for Tony in particular, it is all about character and it is all about performance. That is the only thing we care about. So we're looking for very sort of classic cinematography in the sense of, we don't want anyone to be aware that the camera is there. So it's very, very much keep it as simple as too many camera moves, too if you make the audience too conscious of where the camera is and what it's doing, that's not going to be a shot we're going to use.
There were some obvious exceptions, like when Archie goes to create the circumstances to have a vision.
Yes. We did. We spent quite a long time on that.
That was a terrific scene. Very entertaining.
That's also quite a lot of visual effect in that shot in the end, because the camera just couldn't quite get us there. So we played around. We played around with a lot of visual effects and camera effects to get that effect. That was quite. It's one of those funny moments where you're sitting in the edit suite going, "What do you think? It's a bit weirder that way, or a bit weirder that?" It's one of those sort of funny when you wonder what kind of you're spending your life, what kind of conversations you're having. So that was our sort of broad strokes approach to it, and very much to keep it kind of classic and focused on performance. The other thing, of course, is we're very much about close up. We need to see the actor's face. We need to see the performance. We need to be able to cut to that. That's critical to us. We like, cross shooting to keep it quick as well.
I'm curious to see, you have two cameras for doing an SRS sequence with both actors.
All the time.
There's something about, the importance of a close-up now that we're watching a lot of television. Most of us, I know most of our students who are joining us for this webinar today probably watch content on their laptops. And I think that perhaps the consumption of media at home is altering the way that we shoot things. We're not doing these big David Lean long shots or these Scorsese-esque, engagements. We're really considering, how do you make a head big so we can see the emotion? Exactly. It's fascinating how production is influenced by distribution. I'm curious.
Exactly. And I think it's also that the other thing about Tony's writing is it's very rhythmic. He was an absolute dictator when it came to not one single word of his script can be changed. Not one word. Unless, he's called onto set and it's discussed with him and he'll allow the change.
Sounds like a playwright.
Exactly. And also I totally support him because it's all about the rhythm. If you notice in those long dialogue sections, it's all about the rhythm between the two characters or the two actors or three actors or whatever it might be. So and the danger from his point of view is you'll lose that rhythm, and that takes from the scene and from the humor or the pathos or whatever that particular scene's trying to deliver.
I got to say a word about the music. I mean, it's just fantastic. The underscore, as well as the incorporation of songs like from Mama Cass Elliot and Primal Scream and Sharon Van Etten's cover of Elvis Costello. Can you talk a little bit about how music supervision came in?
That's the wonderful Maggie Phillips, who we started working with sort of very early on, obviously. And she and Tony and I had just a great time doing it. I mean, if you think, what needle drop will we put at the end of this episode? And we would go through songs and we listen to them, and it was a little bit like the cast. We spent a long time doing it. And there was only one song that we couldn't get the rights to in the end, which was a shame. But, I still think we ended up. And, I also think that Bird on the Wire that we had recorded for us for the episode 10 is a beautiful thing. A beautiful thing. We did look, and again, it was very important to us that it have that that you have that contemporary song at the end, and that it just delivers a little bit more on the idea of that episode, or where that character was at the end of that episode. I was a little bit more adamant that it should always be a woman singing, which we didn't do in the end, and I think that was right. But I'm glad you liked it. We had a lot of fun doing that.
You can tell. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So can we talk a little bit about what do you think makes good television? What makes for a really good TV series now? As you said, this show couldn't have been made 5 years ago. Why now? How have things changed?
I think it's because people have an appetite for the unexpected. If you think about how many hours of television we've all watched in the last 5 years, and I think you can underestimate how familiar we become with the way a story folds and unfolds. and the way the depictions of certain characters and how they, you know, how they realize their story or what their arc is, and how that character is relayed. I mean, you can get, I mean, if I think one of the things I look for particularly at the moment is, tell me this, I recognize the story immediately. You know, you're going to tell me a story about a dead girl's body is found in the forest. I mean, how many synopses have you read that start, how many log lines on, you know, have you read like that, you go, oh no, another one. Two quirky detectives, and you know, that's fine. You can do that if you can tell me that story in a unique way that I haven't seen before, that gives me an insight. And I think answers the question that I always find critical, which is, why are you telling me this story? What is it that you want me to understand? And therefore, that affects how you tell the story and how you hold my attention as an audience member. And I think that's, I think we're always, and I think certainly from the network and streamers' point of view, they are looking for an individual voice. I mean, we all need to learn our craft, and all the craft needs to be good, but I think an individual voice and a unique way of telling a story is what will allow you to stand out in the marketplace. Because
no, it was perfect, because it segues right into our first question. And for students who are watching this, if you have a question, there's a little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can suggest a question, and I'll read that aloud, and Marian can discuss it. I've got a question from Pong, who says that that they and their friend are writing a comedy TV miniseries screenplay called Yellow, and it addresses Asian racism in America or elsewhere and explores some of Asian culture. They would like some tips and advice on where to start and how to pitch it to a big production company once they've got it written.
Okay, so the first thing I would say, and that's a very, you know, I don't know, very loose, very brief description. Who's the character? What character are we following? One of the things I think that is interesting about The Great is it is so character-based. Each one of those characters is distinct and individual, and you haven't seen them before. So if you're going to tell us a story about racism against Asians in the United States, who's carrying that story for us? What's the character? Because that's where you need to start. If you're saying, you know, a theme about racism in Asia is so big, and it's so, and the other trap you might fall into, which you need to be careful about, is you do not want to be didactic. You know, you need your audience to find that idea, to find that theme. You don't want to sort of tell everybody up top that that's, you know, you don't want to push it down their throats in a sense, I suppose. But most importantly, think about the character. Who's carrying this story for you? And how are you going to depict? What is it about their specific and unique experience that will allow you to address that universal theme?
So how do you get it out there once it's written? How do you produce a series? I know it's a big question, right? But what do you do with that? You're, you know, a young artist with a great idea and a terrific screenplay. What's next?
Well, there's the agent's route, or there's the, well, that's usually the first step. I mean, if you come out of a film school, which your individuals will, that usually gives you quite a strong intro into the agent's world, because they're always looking. Because the important thing is you need to meet the commissioning editors. You need to meet the creatives at the studios. You need to meet the creators at the networks, and the development executives in those institutions or those companies spend their entire working lives meeting people like film school students or people with a new voice. I mean, the other thing is that I always have to tell people, I always say, is filmmakers make films. You've got to have, if you've got a short story idea, short film idea, make the short film. And I assume your students all make short films or webinars, web series, or
nonstop.
Yeah, that's what you need. That's if you've got something, you've got to have something to show somebody, because first of all, you're the asset, and you're selling yourself when you meet these people. And that's just, usually it's via the agent into the networks and studios. the other kind, I mean, depending if it's comedy, that's slightly different. I mean, there's a whole separate comedy sort of route. And in Australia, it's probably slightly different to the US, but I mean, I don't think it's that. I mean, US isn't that different to what it is in Australia. There's the stand-up comedy route. There's the, you know, that's almost the TikTok route of little comedy things, the YouTube comedy things into a series. Not that you can do TikTok anymore in your country, but hey.
I think well, I think we still have a choice.
Yeah, well, apparently Amazon's retracted their email.
I saw that. Yeah, it's interesting.
And that was an embarrassing moment.
Yeah.
I wonder how much they sell into China.
Nailed it.
Surely not. Yeah, so that's two things. You've got to make things because that's what you are. You're a filmmaker. And then it's about meeting people so they get to know who you are and how you work. I think they're the two most important things. Meet people face to face.
Well, we have a terrific opportunity for networking here at SCAD, particularly through our film festivals and through our lecture series and guests. It's important, but you've got to have great content.
Do you do the speed dating things?
We do. We have some.
They're terrific. They're terrific. You know, you just meet people, even as 5 minutes. I do a lot of those.
Oh, really? Oh, terrific. Terrific. Lots more questions here coming through. Here's a question about the show. Would you say that this is from Amelia Masadi? Thank you, Amelia. Would you say that the show is a parody of history, and what made the pitch for the show make you choose it? And which I think you've answered that in terms of you got involved from the play, and how's it? What made it different from others you saw, which I'm assuming is other material that has come your way? What is it about this that stood out? And would you say it's a parody of history?
Parody. I'm not really quite sure what the difference between a parody and a satire is. But yes, it probably is a parody.
Satire, yeah.
Yeah, it's a satire in that sense, which is a difficult medium these days because it's so easy to take elements of it out of context and be accused of inappropriate behavior, inappropriate language or something. But still, we did it. I mean, just to go back to my earlier comments about the play, I was looking for a vehicle for an older actress. That didn't work out in the end, but it was a fortuitous moment anyway. I think what I'm looking for, why Tony and I have worked together so long is he has a voice, has a very distinct voice, and he and I sort of are curious about the world in similar overlapping ways. So we have all our working and lives and our friendship, we have sent each other books or articles or texted an idea or, you know, just little things. I listened to this today. Have you heard of this? Have you read this book? So we're always exchanging ideas, and it's I think in a way I'm looking for a story that has an overlap with the zeitgeist as I understand it. So if it's, you know, currently, for instance, at the moment, particularly at the moment, certain things that I'm developing, the question we have to face is, this is a film or a TV idea that won't come out for 2 years. Do we acknowledge COVID or don't you acknowledge COVID? And if you do acknowledge COVID, how do you do it? Because you can't, it's too close historically to process it. What does it mean? What are its impacts going to be on characters and themes and stories that don't get viewed for 2 years or a year or something like that? So it's a particularly difficult time now to be thinking about ideas, what kind of ideas you want to be presenting, unless you just want to do a kind of escapism, or you acknowledge up front that it's historical. You know, you said it in the 1990s, or you said it in the early 2000s or something like that. So for instance, we're developing a story at the moment about a man called Chris Barnes, it's a true story, who runs a kangaroo sanctuary in the outback. And
we had a version of that, it was called Tiger King.
Yes, no, this is different. This is different. Kangaroos
Right.
are so different to tigers. This man's got a fairly healthy emotional life as far as I can work out. And we're trying to work out, it is set in the, in Alice Springs or outside Alice Springs, which is in the Northern Territories, which is way out in the outback. But, how much of that do we acknowledge? It won't come out, won't get made until 2021, and it won't come out till 2022. So do you just view it as a piece of, escapism or a different, it's all those sort of things. So it's very much, just to go back to the question in a sense, very long-winded, it's very much about what are the ideas, what is society, where is society now, what is it thinking about? One of the roles of the artist, I think, is to interpret times for audiences, enable them to see, not reportage, which is what the newspapers and journalists and those sorts of people do, but actually to interpret them to a degree and allow you to understand them in a particular way, usually by, one particular artist's vision. But that's your sort of, I think, I see that as the sort of our job in a way, is to help make sense of a time in an interpretation way rather than in a reportage.
Yeah, it's been interesting times, particularly, and that's been something that's been on my mind as a filmmaker and as an educator. How do you address COVID in our stories? Sometimes, a good story with good characters is going to persist regardless, but then how do you incorporate what we're living through right now in a long-term vision? It's definitely challenging and something to think about. I know that a lot of production companies have kind of ceased production or pushing things back for a couple of years. I have a couple of questions about what it means to be a producer. Catherine wanted to know, hang on, I'll come back to that one in a second. Isabel, thank you for asking, what inspired you to become a producer and what caught your attention about producing? And Kimberly is asking, how do you make a name for yourself as an executive producer or a producer in general while networking is key? How do you showcase your abilities and skill sets in that position? What makes a good producer? So it sounds like students are asking, like, I want to be a producer too. How do I assert myself? How do I grow into this position?
I think the first thing I'd say is that nobody knows what a producer does. So it's not everyone says, oh, I think, the producer gets the money or the producer organizes the production, or they don't actually know I'm what's called a creative producer, which means I originate ideas, but I also finance, and in the independent sector, I run the production, but I have a line producer who does the kind of day-to-day organizing of the crew and things like that, and the logistics. But primarily, a lot of people don't understand it. So, for instance, in a relationship that I have with Tony or with other writers and directors, it's very much a creative collaboration. So it might be my idea, I might bring them on, it might be their idea, they bring me on. But you're very much about the big picture. Why I became a producer was somewhat accidental. I did actually sort of direct when I was at university. I didn't do film, I read history, in fact, rather paradoxically.
That's too easy, I'm not going to go there.
No, I'll go there. And I started off directing sort of rather bad short films, but I sort of ended up producing because I'm a sort of person who likes to get things done. So I said, you want to do that? Okay, I'll go organize it. And I just sort of never got back to the directing side of it. I mean, it still appeals to me as an idea, and maybe season 3, episode 12, I could do. That sort of, but it's a sort of, I think it's a kind of, leadership instinct. One of the sort of things my daughter is at university and her friends are sort of just about to graduate. And one of them asked me, if you've got any advice for me about life. And I think that one of the critical questions you have to ask yourself, and I think it's critical in the filmmaking world particular, is what is my relationship to power? Mm. Who do I want to be? Do I want to be the one who's in power, or do I want to be, the one who works for somebody or is realizing or collaborating with, or just consider what your relationship to power is, because that affects what role you take. You cannot be a producer if you're not prepared to take power. And it is, you know, you have to make the difficult decisions. You have to be able to deal with confrontation. You have to be able to negotiate. You have to be able to keep people together and keep them moving. I mean, it's a different, you have to keep coming up with solutions. It's a difficult.
A lot about this in the show we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is. It is. You're going to fail. You know, the thing that I actually think producing is about stamina and experience. If you don't have stamina, and that's true for direction and writing as well. You know, I've watched Tony's career over the years, and he's just kept going and kept working and kept developing and kept learning. Because the terrible thing about filmmaking or television is, and it's the same, it really, is no problem is ever the same. So you learn how to make, you make a decision in one particular situation, and you will never have to make that decision again. But you will make a decision that's similar to that. So you draw on the experience of that decision-making experience in order to make the next one. But the other thing about being a creative producer is you're the generator of the ideas and how they're going to be. And you're the parameter, you provide the parameters for how that is. So what's the vision? What's the writer's vision? What's the director's vision? Recognizing when that's right and when they're on the same path. Understanding learning how to listen is incredibly important. What are they saying and what are they actually saying and what do they think they're saying? Things like that. The other thing you have to learn how to do is how to say no. Very hard. Very easy to say yes. Very hard to say no.
Making the tough calls.
Making the tough calls.
Wow. Ephraim Oliver has a question. What are the pros and cons of developing a show for a large streaming service like Hulu versus traditional cable and network television?
I think probably that you can, I mean, there are no language barriers really anymore. So we could use, something's gone wrong. You still there? I'm
still here. We can still see you. We can still hear you.
Oh, something weird's going on. It says I've signed out.
Nope, still here.
Okay, good. What was I saying? Oh yes, there's no language barriers anymore, and you can pretty much do what you want. I mean, if you look at, you can do that sort of thing. So I suppose it's really that you're not restrained in that traditional censorship way, probably. And also probably that the only thing I suppose you've got to think about a little bit is how wide your audience is, and therefore that are your ideas going to make sense to outside of your own kind of language, cultural experience. Beyond that, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the restraints of North American free-to-air television are, or cable. So I don't know what those restraints would be.
You feel like you have more freedom with what we call over-the-top content by going through like streaming services?
Yeah. So I don't know that there are that many differences anymore.
It seems like...
I tell you what is different, the budget.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
Is it bigger with...
Comfortable. Let's just say it's comfortable. It's comfortable.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's what do you, I think I know the answer to this question. I was going to ask, what are you up to now? Working towards season 2? Is this all consuming?
Yeah, we're just about to start the writer's room for season 2. Mm-hmm. We're exploring, along with every other production company in the world, how you shoot. And England is in almost a bad position as you are when it comes to coronavirus. I mean, Australia is very fortunate. We've got a bit of a spike in Victoria at the moment, but apart from that, where everything's open. Restaurants are open, bars are open. You can fly to different states. It's pretty normal here. All the shops are open.
Will you all be meeting in person, do you think? Will you be meeting in person for the writer's room?
No, we won't. We will once, unfortunately, West Australia, which is where Tony's based at the moment, is shut. So they've locked their border. I mean, don't ask me. Wow. West Australia has a sort of fractious relationship with the rest of the Federation, in as much as it feels like it should secede and become a country in its own right. But so they were delighted to shut the borders, I think, when it came down to that. Oh, those evil Eastern state people. Those evil Eastern state people. So once that opens, the Australian portion of it will meet in person, yes, but not at the moment.
So how much time will you spend in development and in writing? What is it?
It's roughly a 22-week writer's room as such, not all every day, but over that 22-week period, we'll get probably up to about episode 6.
So you'll get through 6 episodes in about 22 weeks.
Yeah.
And what are
that won't be final. That won't be production drafts. That will be outlines, first drafts, that sort of thing.
And so it'll probably be another 3 months until you can move on from there.
Yeah, we won't deliver the final episode. Tony likes to wait to do episodes 9 and 10 until we're well into the shoot.
Why is that?
Because then, you know, it was particularly relevant for season 1, because then we knew how the actors worked together, how the characters worked together, where the story was going. Because one of the things we noticed, in episode 1, was how much, because we'd cut a few episodes by that point as well, how much the episodes lifted when you had Catherine and Peter in room together. So we realized that every episode needed to have a focus around them at a certain point, and that very much affected how we decided to end the season.
Well, I got to tell you, it's a terrific show, and I mean that. The characters are so engaging; they're so compelling. I'm really looking forward to the next season, and I congratulate you all on a job well done.
Thank you.
I also want to thank you for taking some time today. I know you have a busy morning, right? It's morning there. It's not quite getting dark here. Saturday. Well, have a lovely Saturday. We're still on Friday. But thank you tremendously for taking the time to speak with us. It's pretty exciting, and you've answered a lot of my questions, and it's just been a pleasure hearing about the process.
Pleasure. Anytime.
And for you students, please continue to keep tabs on our Guest and Gusto program, and come check in and find out what's going on this summer and into fall. So until then, we're out. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.